All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the COVID-19 Community Support Virtual Update. We're very happy that you could join us for this important look at, what we've done as a community, what we've know now as a community, what we've learned from our process of community support during this COVID-19 epidemic. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Griffith, the Vice President of Development at the Central New York Community Foundation. And today we have four speakers. We have Peter Dunn, our CEO, Frank Ridzi, our Vice President of Community Investment, Nan Eaton, the President of the United Way of Central New York, and Sharon Owens, who's the Deputy Mayor of the City of Syracuse. Monica Moranti, our Senior Director of Philanthropic Services, as I mentioned before, will be monitoring the chat box. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do that, and you'll be hearing from her when we get to the Q&A portion. So at this point, let's get started, and I'll just turn it over to Peter to begin the conversation.
Well, thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody. It's a unbelievably pleasant and sunny day here in Syracuse in Central New York, and obviously we have a serious topic to discuss, but we're really gratified that you took part of your day to join us and hear about the work along with our partners in the community and how the community has come together to respond. To give you a little bit of a sense of the architecture of this presentation, I'm going to do an overview of the fund, the structure, and some of the numbers, grants made, gifts in, and so forth. My colleague Frank Ridzi is going to talk a bit about the grants and things that we're learning, grants that have been made from the fund. Nan Eaton from the United Way will be talking about the agency perspective, things that we're hearing from nonprofits in the community, and things we may be seeing in the future. And then Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens will be doing a Q&A with Sharon to talk through the community perspective. What are we hearing from our neighborhoods and our neighbors and residents in the community at this time? So with that, we're going to we have a PowerPoint that we're going to draw up, and we'll guide the conversation. So you'll be shifting over a bit, and this will be sort of dominating your screen. So background on the funds. Back in the middle of March, immediately following a meeting of the Community Foundations Board, the United Way and Allen Foundation and other partners, the city and the county, came together to create the funds. And so we're going to just talk about the partners and the funds, which span more than Onondaga County, include different parts of Central New York. We'll talk about the founding principles and the structure of the funds, specifically how grant decisions are made and the sort of the values that are behind the decisions and how they're made. I'll do an update on the numbers, specifically the grants that have been made from the fund. And then lastly, talk a little bit about financial support that has come in from the community and the character of that. So you have a sense of the level of donor support and what it's looked like. So the founding principle is that those of us who are in the funding community really saw a need to provide funding that would focus on vulnerable populations. We could go back to focus on vulnerable populations impacted by the economic consequences of the pandemic. And when we get into the grants, you'll see what we mean by vulnerable populations, which span a variety of different types of work and constituencies. It was important that we have shared governance. This is a new model of collaboration between the partners. Weekly, the folks that you see on the screen gather to review grant applications that have come in online, and grant decisions are made on a consensus basis. From time to time, grants that come in are also referred off to different partners to fulfill through their own funding mechanisms, but we operate collectively in a collective funding model. It was important to us that we have an accessible, easy application that's online. We built a Google Sheets application online that different types of organizations can have access to. So it doesn't presume that an organization has a grant seeker on staff. We've had applications from churches, from very small volunteer-based organizations, as well as very large organizations that you're likely familiar with. So Accessibility and ease was really important. And quick review. As I mentioned, we're doing weekly reviews on these funds so that we're doing timely response as a number of the issues we're dealing with really call for very, very prompt response. You see logos here over on the right, and you'll note the Health Foundation, the Allen Foundation, United Way, the city and the county, the Reisman Foundation, and the Community Foundation are the core partners in the Onondaga County Fund. We also have funds for other, if we could go back, we also have funds serving other communities, since the Community Foundation itself serves a broad range of Central New York beyond Onondaga County. We have a COVID Community Response Fund set up for Oswego County in partnership with the United Way of Oswego County and the Shinneman Foundation. The Cayuga County Community Response Fund has also been set up in partnership with the United Way in Auburn in Cayuga County. And the Women's Fund of Central New York, which is a part of the Community Foundation, is also focusing its grants on COVID response. And then lastly, the Community Foundation has an existing anti-poverty initiative in Madison County, the Madison County Rural Poverty Initiative, and we've used that fund as a mechanism for doing quick response grants in Madison County. To date, across all the funds, across all these separate funding mechanisms, we've had over 300 grant requests that have been reviewed and over 100 grants that have been made. To date, across all the funds, more than $1 million in grants have been distributed across this funding area. In terms of the level of support that we've seen in the community, more than $2 million has come in from more than 750 donors. And that's been a real broad range of support. It's encompassed individual contributions from $5 to $250,000. We've seen a trend. You'll recall that the part of the COVID response were stimulus checks that came out to a whole bunch of the population. Those were $1,200 checks. We've seen a number of people who were employed or had resources and decided to turn around and give those checks to the fund. That's been a really heartwarming story that we've seen repeatedly in recent weeks. The Community Foundation's donors have contributed between $500,000 and $600,000 of the total amount that's come in. Plus the Community Foundation itself has put in $300,000 to seed the fund. So the folks who have existing funding relationships with the Community Foundation have been strong supporters of this effort, which has been really gratifying to see. Local foundations and businesses have been strong supporters as well. Many of our local banks and leading businesses have been funders, as well as funders that fund across the state, like the New York State Health Foundation, as well as organizations that have a primarily social mission and wanted to be a part of this effort, including the Sisters of St. Francis and the Newman communities. We've also seen really interesting fundraisers and activities that are just, like I said before, really heartwarming and interesting. We had a musician who didn't have any gigs because bars and other event locations are closed. So he did a Facebook Live concert and raised almost $1,000 for the fund. The Greek community up at Syracuse University, they've all gone home. They're not here. The students have gone away following the shutdown of local academic work at the university. The Greek system, the Greek collaboratively, the sororities and fraternities and sororities raised about $5,000 for the fund. We've seen individuals kids who have had lemonade stands, families that have given together, church groups that have come together. There's a whole range of folks who felt really compelled to support the fund and support the work, and we've been really, really gratified by both the range of support and the amount that has been realized for the benefit of Central New York communities. With that, and sort of that broad range of overview about the governance structure, the grants that have been distributed and the funds that have come in, I'm going to turn it over to Frank Ridzi to talk about the grants that have been made and some of the things that we're learning.
Great, thank you, Peter. On to the next slide, you'll see that I'd like to share a few of the main themes that we've been seeing. As you can tell, it's probably very hard for this group to look through quite a few grants every week, and we really have to focus on the key needs at this moment for our community. So the three main themes when you look at grants have been basic needs, vital services, the continuation of those, and then proper safety precautions. If we go to the next slide, I'll give you a sense of what we've been funding in each of these areas. So when it comes to basic needs for the underserved and vulnerable populations in our community, the first thing that probably comes to mind is food and food pantries, and that certainly has been where the bulk of our funding has gone. And these are food pantries all over, as far north as the Pulaski Community Cupboard, all through the city. You've got Belgrove Missionary Baptist Church, Tucker, a lot of churches getting involved, handing out food. You've got places like St. Lucy's and University United Methodist, and also places like DeWitt Food Pantry. So we've been funding a lot of those direct delivery organizations and groups that have really motivated to serve people who are perhaps not otherwise connected to the nonprofit network. But we've also helped to fund the larger network that provides food to these groups, most specifically, the food bank and other major groups like Peace Incorporated. Some groups have really stepped up. For instance, if you think of Mercy Works, many people had not heard of them until they really stepped up to work with the school district with the initial question of, well, how do families get food? That they used to rely on the school food programs, and how do they get weekend groceries? And so they really stepped up in that next category. But also a lot of groups stepping up for emergency food parcels, cleaning supplies, hygiene items, Delta Torch, for instance, dedicating a lot of their work to hygiene items for young women in Syracuse. You think of food, but you may not think of diapers unless you have a young one at home. And diaper needs are often not covered by other government programs. So the diaper bank, for instance, grant serving both in multiple counties has really stepped up. And then I was on a call the other day, and it was actually an international call, but everybody's suffering from COVID, and they were talking about how they these were other community foundation type folks sharing insights, and one was interrupted by somebody fixing their plumbing, and then I pointed out I had a plumbing problem, and plumbing seems to not wait for COVID. So we've also funded groups to assist, such as Home Headquarters, to help homeowners with discretionary income, without discretionary income, and making those emergency type home repairs. So that those are sort of a flavor for what we've done in terms of basic needs. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see that we've also made an effort to help the vital services that our nonprofit sector provides shift over to the new online environment. Now that people are not in person, a lot of those services still need to get delivered. So technology for agencies that support people with mental health conditions or disabilities, groups like hospice, palliative care, still needing to be able to do e-health, in Madison County, for instance, or Arc of Onondaga, Arise, or groups like Cancer Connects, transporting people with compromised immunosystems, to their appointments. So, so those things still need to happen, and those are all groups that have been funded from this fund. Producing remote parenting education classes. You've heard about this from parents probably, or if you are one yourself, what a challenge it can be. And so groups like Children's Consortium Services have really stepped up. The Early Childhood Alliance, they've stepped up to help parents to continue continue that process of learning for our children now that they're doing it remotely. Financial and career counseling for veterans and their families. This can be a traumatic experience for many of us, and so groups like, excuse me, Clear Path for Veterans have stepped up to help out in things like this. And also, when we talk about being available to people, maintaining that accessibility for victims of domestic violence. This is a stressful time. It's and you see that the stressors that lead to or trigger domestic violence, can certainly be increasing. So Vera House, for instance, has really stepped forward here. And also to offer things like virtual care consultations, referral meetings, support groups, education programs to people like dementia people who have dementia. So Alzheimer's Association, for instance, stepped forward there. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that the third category, in addition to moving things to technology and those basic provision of services is the the PPP, what we've heard about, the personal protection gear. So there are, we want to make sure that everyone is safe. And so we've really focused on vulnerable populations such as the elderly and refugees who have often struggled to understand or obtain accurate information. So, we're a refugee resettlement community with over 10,000 refugee families who have fled other traumas, and now they're faced with another. And not only that, but listening to radio and TV and hearing about the current up-to-date best practices for keeping oneself and one family safe, those are changing on a day-to-day basis. So we've funded groups like Rise, Northside Learning Center, to really help make sure those families are, many of them who are essential workers and leaving to go keep our community running, are getting up-to-date information that they understand that gets through any sort of translation barriers. Also elderly residents, groups like Interfaith Works. This is a group that can already be isolated, and even more so now that we're social distancing. So making sure that those groups are really served. And I mentioned the PPE, the personal protective equipment. We've not only helped places like Oneida Healthcare, with thermometers and things like that. But we've also helped groups like Oswego Industries in the bottom category to actually produce cotton masks and gowns that can actually be used by local healthcare providers in the community. So, really, we've been funding a variety of things. Each of these things are the essential needs that have been coming to the forefront so far. But we do anticipate that needs will change as more and more people go back to work, as the economy reopens, and we do anticipate that those needs will continue to change. We continue to track them through multiple data sources, both word of mouth, surveys, the organizations we're working with, talking to their clients, and the network of funders and nonprofits that are involved is quite vast. So we'll continue to keep on top of those community needs. So thank you. I'll pass it on to Nan, who's been critical in this entire process from the get-go, and not only launching the fund, but also helping to make these decisions about grants. Nan?
Thank you, Frank, and thanks, Peter. And thanks all of you for sharing part of your day with us. I think as we're, you can go to the next slide, we all sort of are trying to live through an earthquake and figure out how to get our solid footing when the earthquake is still happening. So that is certainly true for our nonprofits. Many of you are involved with them on boards and in leadership roles. And of course, you are the folks who in many ways are the philanthropic backbone of our community. So you're well aware of the fact that just as everyone in our community is trying to sort this all out, so too are the nonprofits. I believe that in this community, we have done better than in many communities, and it's because of the amount of collaboration, connection, communication that existed before and has actually just grown during this time. So we're all proud that we came together immediately to let the community know we're all in this together, we're one community, and there's one way for us all to respond. The needs continue to change. As we've thought so often, people have talked about who are we so thankful for during this time. I want you to know that with our healthcare workers and others, including our folks who are grocery store workers, our nonprofit human service folks have been incredible. I mean, the folks on the front lines from day one said, whatever you need me to do, tell me, I will do it. And they are continuing to do that. So we're really proud of them. We know that the Community Support Fund has met some of the most urgent needs. And I know all of you are aware of 211, which is the 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week hotline. We are proud to be part of coordinating here in Central New York through the amazing team at Contact Community Services. So the increase in calls has been astronomical since day one. So just as an example, on March 23rd, I think when many of us started to say, oh my gosh, this is a big deal, it's not ending anytime soon, they answered 666 calls from people that needed all kinds of information. They were scared. They didn't know what to do. And as you know from the news you've seen, many people experienced need who have never necessarily been there before. They may have been living paycheck to paycheck, but they weren't people who didn't have food. So 211 has done an amazing job and have continued to monitor the changes. So one of the things we've done in sort of working together with these changing needs is the county and city, we immediately together with those of us in the coordination end of services, started daily calls at first on particular topics like adult need for food, which adults weren't able to get out, how do we serve them? How are people getting food through the food bank, through pantries? How are the school districts doing with food distribution? That continues to be a big need, and as you've seen from the fund, we've supported food. I'm sure most of you saw the news that the county had no choice but to make cuts in human services. Many of our local human services are funded through sales tax revenue. The county, I don't think Ryan has figured out how to print money yet. So the bottom line is cuts were inevitable. We're hopeful that the federal government is going to come through. But in the meantime, many of our agencies have already received notices of cuts. So our help as a community is more important than ever before. We thankfully are continuing our conversations in terms of collaborating. So pre-COVID, I will tell you, for our 211 hotline, the number one call was about housing. People who are housing vulnerable or homeless. We in this community, because of the collaborations that already were in place, we had actually been decreasing homelessness in this community, unlike many. Now we're sort of on the brink, and to be honest with you, one of the things we know is going to be a big issue is this housing vulnerability. So you know that there's a moratorium on evictions right now. It was extended through August. Well, the floodgates will open. And those of you who may be landlords or know landlords, at that end, they're struggling because we all know the economy as in total is in chaos. So while a third of the economy is nonprofits, the other 2/3 are also trying to sort it out. So in terms of how are we going to respond to, for example, the housing needs that we know are going to occur, our 4 nonprofit legal service agencies have done an incredible job of working together always, and even more now. And thanks to our deputy mayor, pulling together folks in the city to say, okay, how do we deal with these issues during this time of a pandemic? They now have created the legal services agencies one phone number people can call, and they together are going to triage those calls so that people don't have to figure out which of those 4 legal services agencies should I call with my particular issue. It's a great improvement in our system, and so that's fortunately a benefit we will see going forward. We also, in addition to sort of food, housing needs, we know that folks are struggling emotionally. So more and more callers to 211 are talking about mental health needs. So we as a community have been trying to respond, the agencies, with our support through all of you and the Community Support Fund. We were able to build infrastructure in many of our agencies so that they can now reach people remotely. And that has been a vital service, and we're going to need it more and more. And yet we worry because we don't have our eyes on folks who are needing us to be able to see what's happening in their homes and our children being cared for. And our folks in domestic violence situations are home sometimes with folks who have anger issues all the time. So people are scared in terms of not having that same access they've had. Our nonprofits obviously count on each other and also count on all of you and our community to support them. Many were struggling since the tax law changed, to be honest with you, right? Because they had seen fundraising go down. All of the people in this meeting right now, I know your calendars have been much more empty in the evenings because you haven't gone to all the spring fundraisers that were on your calendars for the spring. How are the nonprofits going to replace that funding? And especially if the county needs to make cuts and we don't get that filled another way, we're going to have to really look carefully at how we support our nonprofits. And I think it's fair to say that the nonprofit landscape and our economic landscape really has changed forever. So how do we really think about that as a community? And how do we consider supporting nonprofits going forward? When I think about sort of the coming months and even the coming year and beyond, we know certain things. One is that change is still happening way too fast for us to have any sense of stability. We've seen that food is an issue. We're concerned about what's going to happen in the summer if there's no summer school, because many families, again, children are being fed by the schools. And can we sustain this amazing system that has come together? As Frank referenced, Mercy Works and Volunteers Through Abundant Life and other organizations. Meals on Wheels tremendously increased their services, and our nonprofits made more meals. Rescue Mission, Peace, Salvation Army. Can they continue to do that? Housing, as I said, I think is a big issue, and we're all going to have to really keep track of what we're going to do. The deputy mayor may talk in a moment a little bit when she talks with Peter about some of the plans that are being put in place to think about that. And then longer term, what if there is no school in the fall? We have people who are very concerned about not only now, what are they doing for childcare, but going forward, what are they going to do if we're not back in session in the fall? And can our childcare system, first of all, continue, because it is certainly at risk? And secondly, can it sustain and support families? And can those families afford childcare even if we make it available? We in the United Way world talk often about ALICE, and I know many of you have heard about this, so stands really for the working folks who make it paycheck to paycheck, maybe. Asset limited, income constrained, employed. What we know is many people in our community were ALICE before this hit. And the data shows us that the recession in 2008, folks who had been living to paycheck to paycheck before that time, never really joined any sort of a recovery in a meaningful way. How are we as a community going to help folks who are in that ALICE population, which has undoubtedly grown? And how are we going to sort of preserve and protect that network of services that everyone in our community needs? The final thing I'll say before I introduce someone I admire greatly is that I know my partners in this presentation join me in hoping you'll help us reframe the community conversation, because I don't believe we can help our community totally get our footing again and start to rebuild if we're still feeling as if we're in crisis. So we would love to think about reframing so that we're thinking about we're rebounding, we are rebuilding, restoring, we're revitalizing, we're taking the opportunity. We've seen what's happening around the country. We know these are times many things need to change. So how can we reimagine the possibilities for our community? And I can tell you that there's nowhere else I would rather live. There are no partners I would rather work with than the people involved and those of you joining in this meeting. And with that, I will turn the program over to our incredibly talented Deputy Mayor, Sharon Owens.
Thanks, Nan, and for providing that context. We're really gratified to have Sharon with us today and have her perspective from the mayor's office in the city and deep into all the workings between different government entities and the people in the city. On the next slide, we have a whole series of questions that we thought we'd use just to structure conversation, and there'll probably be other things that come up as well. But first off, the first question that comes to mind for the Deputy Mayor is, what are you hearing from communities and neighborhoods in the city? We talked about a bunch of needs and issues, but what have you been hearing most prominently in recent weeks?
This forum was set up to talk about COVID-19 and the response and where people are, and it's hard to isolate that conversation with the conversation going on in Syracuse as we speak and around this country as a result of the death of George Floyd. So Nan brought up an amazing point, really crafting a dialogue in our community that while COVID exacerbated many of the inequities in our community around food insecurity, food deserts, around health disparities, et cetera, abilities of children to learn. When, you know, the school district, I think, did an amazing job in setting up the remote learning opportunity, particularly through the public channel, but not all kids were able to get access to that through our cable companies. And so we had to really do some maneuvering with Spectrum and with some other folks to ensure that that happens. So when we were initially moving through, it was all about food, 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 food. And I can't tell you enough how completely blessed we are and amazed I am at the Food Bank of Central New York. They have been incredible. They have really fine-tuned their engine for their typical food giveaways and have been flexible to bring on us newcomers who have nothing to do with food distribution, but have all these great ideas. And so they've been amazing. Job insecurity, there are still people who have not received an unemployment check. Just recently, I've heard individuals who just called me saying, I got my stimulus check and they got $1,200 in a month. We're in June. And so there are individuals who were waiting for those funds all this time and each time getting more and more anxious and panicked about this. As we reopen, they're anxious about that. Will my company reopen? Will I go back to work? How safe will it be for me to go? We talked about economic justice issues, not just about what people are earning, but the fact that people had to put themselves in peril so all of us can make sure we can get our groceries every day. So continue those. The dynamics in the world right now, you're even adding another layer of stress on people, as you all reported about mental health and being able to, even in city government, you can't separate yourself and who you are. And we're proud that we've diversified city government, and particularly with people of color and younger people, and being able to manage the feelings and what's going on in the world right now with being able to do your job is extremely stressful. I think along with the housing issues that there are two things that keep me up at night. What's going to happen at the end of the moratorium, and what are we going to do in the summer with all these young people? Those are the two things that keep me up at night. Well, and what's going on every day and protests every day today. But so we don't have enough time for me to talk about everything, but the two things for me right now is housing and these young people in the summer.
Can you give us a sense, you know, government's a complex thing and how all the governments interface and work together. Can you give us a sense, since you're in the middle of it, workings between the city and the county and the different government agencies and how folks have been working together at this time?
Yeah, I can't tell you how proud I am of our community. From day one, there was a complete understanding of the hierarchy. New York State to Onondaga County to the city, towns, and villages. It was just immediately understood to be so, and we all lined up. We understood that we were in a unprecedented moment, and I cannot give enough praise to County Exec Ryan McMahon and his team. Nan mentioned we were in constant phone calls, and because of those existing relationships we had, it all began to, we were in panic mode. Nancy's shaking her head. We were kind of panic mode, trying to figure out what direction we were going. By maybe week 3, it was starting to gel. And by the end of maybe the first month, we were on a rhythm. And so that continues even now when we're coordinating testing and still coordinating food drop-off and pickups. So our government entities all across the board, whether it was basic human needs to education to economic development, have been lockstep together. It's been amazing. We should really be proud of our community.
It's just really heartening, and it's great to hear that, because you do hear negative things, and being able to hear that government folks are all kind of rowing in the same direction is a really positive story coming out of this, that we've been resilient and been able to respond, and we've had all these different things thrown at us that we've never seen before. We already talked a little bit about the things that are most concerning to you, that are keeping you up at night, and we're also in the middle of a time of protest, and really recognizing some racial equity and racial justice issues that are coming to the fore, that have been with us for generations, but are now being talked about even more fiercely. Putting that on the flip side, what gives you hope going forward? When you think about, as you reflect on the work in the community and the work of the city and the partners, what gives you hope?
Just the people. I mean, even when we think about government, I mean, it's no secret. City and county for years didn't get along. We came into office saying that this is not about us, this is about the people of this community. County felt the same way. Does that mean we get along all the time about everything? No, but everyone keeps in the forefront. The most important thing are the residents and the stakeholders in our communities. Just the way under COVID that everyone just came together. I mean, just organically. And Nancy made a great point. We didn't have to develop relationships. They were already there. We just had to maneuver under something none of us had ever faced before, how to manage those relationships in this new area that we just were blindsided by. But that collaboration is a testament to even how Central New York is able to incrementally loosen the faucet and reopen. And even in that, we're all holding ourselves accountable about how we do that as well, because the ultimate responsibility and priority for all of us is keeping each other safe. It is the people, and okay, Sharon, this is cliche, but it's the truth. It is the people of this community that I just am floored about, whether it's COVID or even what we're going through right now with the protests.
And that's really gratifying. I can say that when I've talked to my colleagues in other communities, I think we're blessed that we have really collaborative relationships, whether it's in the funding community, among the foundations in United Way, or between city and county and other government organizations. We've been able to do things pretty quickly. We've been big enough to have resources to deploy, but small enough to have relationships that count, and been able to work together collectively and collaboratively.
Peter, just to that point is the prioritizing our community. The folks in that first slide that have been participating in this stay on the phone for hours, painstakingly going through every single one of those applications, your staff, because this was important, and we didn't want to make arbitrary decisions, or it was very, very methodical, and just, I think the folks on the phone should know that, on the Zoom should know that.
No, I always think I'd like to have a little bit of glass full when we're talking about glass half empty or more than that. So, and I think it's helpful, especially in Central New York, when sometimes we veer to negativity, to look at some of the positives that we've seen as we've come together in response. I really want to thank Sharon, the Deputy Mayor, for joining us today. And we do have some opportunity for questions. We're happy to take your questions and talk about any issues that we might not have reviewed in the prior parts of the conversation. Just to sum up, your involvement's really essential, whether you're a volunteer or you're a member of a board of a nonprofit. You play a governance role in helping that organization succeed and thrive, or you're a donor, or you're a member of the community, helping your neighbors. Really, involvement and engagement is essential. Secondly, Obviously, we've had great success, I think, in building the community support fund with more than 2 million received and more than 1 million in grants distributed. Those funds will probably be distributed before the end of June, I would think, purely to support COVID response. But I also want to encourage you, because the Community Foundation in particular sees a lot of giving for a lot of different things. Really want to encourage you to support your favorite nonprofits. If you were thinking about waiting till December to give, thinking about giving now, think about giving unrestricted for general operating purposes so that organizations have the most flexibility to manage their cash, whether you're supporting arts and culture organizations or basic needs and human services, whatever the issue is that really speaks to you, please support it in a way that is meaningful to you. Community response is going to evolve, right? We've talked a lot about response today. And Nan touched a little bit about what recovery could look like. And then as we talked about some of the emerging issues, what reconstruction looks like after that. There's going to be different phases of need and issues. What we're really dealing with right now is response. And so these conversations are going to change and evolve over the coming weeks and months as we really get a sense of how the nonprofits that we really cherish in this community are impacted, and the residents who are all our neighbors are impacted by this. So we hope you'll stay engaged. We hope you'll contribute to the community in a way that is meaningful to you, and be mindful and watch out for the information that you'll see on how the community is evolving and the nonprofits that are so essential to our quality of life. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Thanks, Peter. We did get a few questions submitted beforehand, and I'll start with those. And then, of course, if you'd like to submit questions now while we have time, just select my name from the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to share those with our panelists. Oh dear. So sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay, great. What do you see as our community's largest need going forward after reopening, both for small businesses and for individuals?
Small businesses, I've brought this up with the group that meets about the funding, is that I'm concerned about their actual capacity. Up to now, they've really taken a financial hit. So now there are quite a bit of requirements to reopen for businesses that have to do with protecting themselves and their customers. And so I am concerned about their ability to modify space, to have enough PPE to provide, to meet the guidelines. So I am concerned about that for small business. For individuals, it is all about getting the economy flowing so we can get income back into the hands of individuals in this community. And we are still at the city waiting for guidelines regarding what kind of recreation we can provide for our parks department for young people. Can pools operate? Can camps operate? What can we do? So we're trying to be extremely innovative to ensure. We also repeatedly, for the last 3 years, have had a very strong summer youth employment program. It's been funded by the state. We have not received word from the state about that program. It does concern me. They have given us regularly $1.1 million, and that's been funded to the county, and CNY Works has administered it. And at this point, we still have not gotten a commitment from the state regarding those funds. Just to think about all those teams without at least the 20 to 25 hours a week that we were able to provide them meaningful employment and a paycheck.
I think one of my biggest concerns builds off one of the previous conversations, and that's housing. In the city, a significant proportion of the population are renters. How are the stay on evictions, how is that going to affect people? We know landlords are stressed too, because they may not be receiving rent. So this all sort of rolls up the economic food chain. Folks have mortgages, folks have car payments. How is all that going to happen? Kind of need the economy to start to proceed, but doing that in a way that also keeps us safe. And I think we're starting to see things loosen up a bit. At least that's my sense in being around the city. But the housing issue is so overwhelming and the economics of it are so daunting that when we talked about it at the fund level, it's been hard for us to see how we can get to it given the scale of the issue. So we've been able to support some things around home repairs and things of that nature, but when you're talking about missed mortgage and rent payments, the scale is just gigantic. So I think the long-term impacts of those issues, I think a lot of this will also some things will get more clarified towards the end of the month if there's an additional federal stimulus package that does some things to address the city, county, and state budget situations that are endemic across the country. Red and blue states, every state has this issue. What is that? I think we need to get to that. When we have some clarity around that, then we'll know better what the nonprofits in the community are facing, and then ultimately what our residents are facing too.
And as I referenced, childcare, I think, is just a very large concern for families. And, the Office of Children and Family Services is thinking, I think, pretty carefully about group sizes and what would be allowed. So if you have a daycare classroom and the maximum is 10, including the teacher, that makes it very hard to sustain that as a business. Whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, I think that that's the case. In terms of the summer, people are concerned, and then in the school year, if they have school-age children, will the school-age childcare programs be able to continue even if school isn't in session? I know there are conversations with different districts about whether or not those programs could operate in schools even if school isn't in session. I think some districts are more thinking along the lines they could make that work, and then would they charge more to have those programs exist in the schools if the school isn't open for anything else. So I think childcare, the county has done a great job, I want to mention, of supporting childcare for essential workers. And as far as we know, that continues through June 30th. They've done a great job. And Lori Shakow and Childcare Solutions did an amazing job of identifying who had slots, who was still open, helping essential workers who work in healthcare and other places get there. So that was regardless of income, their childcare was paid for. So that was really important to essential workers, how we go forward. And then if there's a second wave, those are all things I think people are feeling concerned about, and businesses too. So small businesses have fewer employees. They don't have any cushion, same as nonprofits in a way. So what happens if you have employees who test positive, and what do you do? How do you get your workplace? Do you have to sanitize? Do you have to shut down? So I think those things are all going to be things that'll be in people's minds.
Thanks, Nan. The next question from Jeff kind of dovetails with what you were just saying. Are there a number of nonprofits or a select number of nonprofits who are out of funds and needing new partners or relationships to survive and continue their missions?
I think that what I'll say, I want to give a shout out to the Community Foundation, because they have certainly been supportive of conversations around affiliation, merger. I think Peter calls it dating and perhaps marriage. So I think this time of crisis will lead us to opportunities for sure. We're thinking about lessons learned. So I'm grateful that the Community Foundation continues to offer that opportunity. It's a sensitive topic, and I have close friends who've reminded me that the word merger makes people very uncomfortable. So I think how we approach those conversations with sensitivity, I think many would agree we have alphabet soup of nonprofits in our community. So are there ways we can encourage folks with really complementary missions to think about working together that I think could be a benefit to a community? And certainly many of our nonprofits are struggling, no question.
And to
I'd like
piggyback
to
on,
build off that, I'm sorry.
go ahead, Peter.
I just wanted to build off that a bit. Over the last decade, the Community Foundation has helped fund more than 35 organizations coming together to merge or affiliate. through our Strategic Partnership Fund. The board of the Community Foundation has recapitalized that fund, and we've also received support for it from the Snow Foundation and the Reisman Foundation. So that fund continues to provide support grants really to facilitate last-in type costs, legal, accounting, communications, board facilitation, whatever the issue might be, to facilitate affiliations. They're not always the answer, especially when you have struggling organizations, but sometimes a board is confronted with an issue. I want to preserve the mission. Is the entity that we're running the mission through the only way for us to do that? And so how do you create an economically sustainable model for the vision and mission that organizations have created? So we remain committed to that work and funding those types of situations. I will tell you, building off what Nan said, it is not easy. I've been on numerous boards, and I've had the opportunity during my time here in Syracuse to participate in 3 different merger conversations that all resulted in affiliations. And these sometimes were small organizations with $100,000 budgets, just as hard as an organization with a multi-million-dollar or tens of million-dollar budget. Even small organizations have complexities that demands quite a bit from those in governance on a board and in terms of their commitment. And but it's also really important work. So we want to honor that, the bravery behind having those conversations, and provide support to be able to enable them when we can. I would anticipate that we're going to have more of those, especially as we get into the fall.
Great. And the last thing I'd add is that if you know of a nonprofit that is facing these types of issues, we anticipate having a workshop coming up in the late summer. So that workshop will not only help to go over a lot of the details that can be involved in the variety of different types of strategic partnerships, but also can be a launch pad into collaboration agreements and potentially looking for funding from the fund that Peter mentioned.
Great. There's a question from Lucia, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. She's affiliated with the New York Bar Association, and she said that she's learned in recent weeks that the demands made on legal service providers across the state and in central New York have increased dramatically due to the pandemic. How are we planning to respond to those increased financial needs of legal service providers?
Thank you, Lucia, for that question and for your engagement on these issues. The rights for folks to be represented effectively are really core to our culture and our society. So how is that going to happen? We've seen requests for support from those organizations through our COVID fund, but also through our community grant making at the Community Foundation. And I know that, for instance, the Volunteer Lawyers Project that I've been engaged with has also sought support from other funders as well. Legal services really do depend on government grants from the judiciary. So the preponderance of their support really has come from those grants that have been increased significantly in recent years at the instigation of the Chief Judge of the state of New York, really trying to enhance the services for individuals so that they have access to legal representation. And those run the gamut from evictions to family law issues, commercial disputes, you name it. There's a whole bunch of things that can be impediments to people having a successful life, and being able to address those through legal services are phenomenally important. So we've certainly had conversations. I know other funders have had as well, but I think we're also looking to see exactly what the effect of the judiciary will be from impending state budget cuts.
We had a question from Frank about COVID-related contributions. Are there any special personal income tax provisions for COVID-related contributions?
Before we answer that question, I just wanted to step in here. It's right at the end of our time, and we will go ahead and proceed to answer the few remaining questions that we have. But I wanted to, I know our deputy mayor needs to step off here at the 2:30 mark, and so I just wanted to say thank you to her again for her time today, and just wanted to thank all of you that joined us today. And if anyone else has to leave at 2:30, we really appreciate you being with us to share and have this discussion. So thank you very much.
Just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for everything you do for our community. We are going to get through this just like we get through everything. We are Central New York tough, and we love one another. So thank you all very much.
So circling back to that question about COVID-related contributions, do we have some knowledge that we could share back with Frank on that?
I think with respect to contributions, with respect to giving, there is in the first of the bills that came out from Congress, there is a $300 above the line credit that you can get, whether you give to any organization, whether it's COVID related or not. It's an additional incentive to give. As Nan mentioned before, we've seen a decline in charitable giving as a result of the tax bill that was passed a couple of years ago, which limited the itemization that many people used to avail themselves of. That $300 incentive is something that's new. There is advocacy going on to increase that, whether to create a universal charitable deduction or to enhance the above the line credit that was instituted before. Tom, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that, your point about the fact that they're continuing to work on, even a universal charitable deduction, it's a great sign that Congress is continuing to consider that. I think that there's always opportunities to look at with your professional advisors around how best to give and to make that most effective for you in your situation. And we always are glad to help facilitate those conversations.
One of our last questions, we're getting down to the bottom of the list here for right now, is from Peggy. She asks about art organizations. And it's a pretty open question. So interpret that how you will. What about our arts organizations and how are they going to be impacted?
Yeah, I've been giving this a lot, just to speak for myself and for the Community Foundation, I can say that I've been giving this a lot of thought and trying to figure out what would be a way that the Community Foundation could respond. I will share that through our donor advised funds, we've seen an increase in giving to organizations. We know that the spirit of people giving to things they love is definitely showing up, whether it's gifts to the Everson or to Stage or the Red House or whatever arts or culture organization folks are connected to. We have seen an increase in giving beyond the basic needs, which is gratifying to see. In our open grant rounds, for our community grant rounds, we've also been seeing requests for more general operating type support, not specific program support, but outright general operating support from arts organizations. And I expect that we'll continue to see some of that as they try to get back on their feet. We've had some organizations ask if we might consider loans, and we haven't quite been able to figure out a structure that would work for that. But I've been committed to looking at different interesting and creative ways that the Community Foundation might engage with arts and culture organizations. And so that's an issue I've been looking at to see if we might create a structure and have a conversation with our board about what would make sense from a fiduciary perspective. And then lastly, we commissioned a study through CNY Arts to do a survey of their constituency and get a sense of what they're learning from in terms of the fiscal capacity of arts organizations who haven't been able to have events, haven't been able to do get paid revenue in the form of attendance. So how are they, because they're really in that last bucket, that stage 4 of coming back after as part of COVID, what is going to happen with them? So we're staying in touch, and we're definitely having funding conversations with some, and I think some are sort of battening down the hatches in the hopes of surviving for a better day.
I'd like to add that, while United Way is really focused on that network of human services that so many of you help support, and honestly, that's the reason why our community could act so quickly, because we all coordinate and make sure that those basic services are available. So we're really concerned about that, especially with the agencies having funding cuts. But to Peter's, one of his ending points on the slides, what we always say to people is, in order for us to have a community where people want to stay, where people want to come, where businesses thrive, we have to have a robust arts community. We have to have recreational opportunities. So we're hoping, to Peter's point earlier, that people will continue to support the organizations they have supported, and then also think together about how do we make sure the most vital human services needs are met. So I think that it's all of it that really matters. We have to have the community that people want to both stay in and thrive, and also a community where we have our businesses that can recruit people from other areas to come, not just because they want to move out of a densely populated city that has a high percentage of people with COVID virus right now, but that they recognize this is really a pretty fantastic place to live.
That was the last question that we had on our list. I know that sometimes thoughts and ideas come up after these sorts of things. So if you have questions that you'd like to send our way, I see a lot of familiar faces on the screen and some faces that I don't know, and that's okay too. You have our information. Please reach out to us so we can keep in touch and keep this conversation going in this era of new normals and new ways forward.
Yeah, thanks again, Monica, for facilitating that. And to everyone, we're just so happy that you joined us today. Hope we've answered all your questions. As Monica said, please send more along. Or if there's other topics that come up that you'd like to discuss, please let us know. And at that, I'll just say thank you once again, and hope to see you all soon.